No permits, no inspections. Keep building and we'll seize your land. That's what they told him. A man who once stood between enemy fire and his brothers in arms now threatened with losing the only home he had left. They thought he would bow his head. They thought he would walk away quietly. They forgot who they were dealing with, because behind that weathered old Marine was a loyalty they could never understand. A loyalty that stretched across battlefields, across decades. And when the call went out, it answered. They didn't just come back to rebuild a farm. They came back to rebuild a life and to remind the world that true honor never fades. Stay with us. This story will restore your faith in brotherhood, in gratitude, and in promises that never break. Welcome to Grateful Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. The rain had started early that morning, drumming softly against the courthouse windows as Judge Daniel Brooks adjusted his robes in his chambers. It was supposed to be an ordinary Tuesday, another docket filled with foreclosure cases, petty disputes, and the weary march of papers over compassion. Daniel rubbed his temples, feeling the dull ache of fatigue settle between his eyes. Lately, it seemed every case was the same bank swallowing up land, families uprooted, faces blending into a gray blur of defeat. Once upon a time, he had believed in justice. Now he mostly believed in moving the calendar forward. He glanced down at the first case file for the morning. First National Bank versus William Carter. Another foreclosure, another life reduced to ledger lines and signatures. He sighed and stood squaring his shoulders before stepping into the courtroom. The room was modest rows of worn wooden benches lined up under harsh fluorescent lights. A few scattered observers sat quietly, most just waiting for their own turn. Daniel took his seat behind the elevated bench, nodding to the bailiff, who called out in a crisp voice, "Case number 1482, First National Bank versus William Carter." The heavy doors creaked open. A frail old man shuffled forward, guided by a public defender who looked barely old enough to rent a car. The old man wore a battered brown coat that hung off his thin frame, a faded baseball cap crumpled in his hand. His boots were cracked soles, barely holding together. But even in his hunched posture, there was something solid, something that hadn't yet broken. Though it was clear the world had tried, Daniel squinted, leaning slightly forward. The clerk cleared his throat. "State your full name, sir." The old man's voice was a low rasp, but firm. "William Carter. Colonel, United States Marine Corps, retired." Daniel's heart jolted. The courtroom blurred for a moment as memories rushed him like a freight train. A scorching desert. The crack of gunfire. The scream of metal as an ambush shattered their convoy outside Fallujah. And in the center of it all, a man bigger than life, throwing himself into the line of fire. A man who refused to let a single one of them fall. Colonel William Carter. The man who had saved Daniel's life. Daniel gripped the edge of his bench so hard his knuckles whitened. The courtroom sounds faded into a dull roar. It couldn't be that man. That hero couldn't be the same hollow-eyed figure standing in front of him now, waiting to lose the last piece of his life. He cleared his throat, struggling to regain composure. "Proceed," he said, voice rougher than intended. The attorney for First National Bank, a sleek woman in a tailored navy suit, stood up, shuffling her papers with an air of mechanical efficiency. "Your Honor, the defendant has been in default on his property loan for over 18 months. Attempts to negotiate a payment plan have failed. The bank seeks immediate foreclosure on the property located at 1120 Hollow Creek Road, with a full eviction order to follow." Daniel barely heard her. His gaze remained fixed on William Carter. The man stood ramrod straight despite his obvious pain. Old habits, it seemed, died hard. His eyes clear, but world-weary. Met Daniel's for a brief moment, and Daniel felt a lump rise in his throat. Did he even recognize him? "Does the defendant have representation?" Daniel asked, forcing formalities through the whirlwind in his mind. The young public defender cleared his throat nervously. "Yes, Your Honor, Charles Dugan for the defendant. We request consideration for an extension based on extenuating circumstances." The bank's lawyer cut in sharply. "Your Honor, the bank has already granted multiple extensions. We cannot continue to absorb losses indefinitely." Daniel raised a hand to silence the argument. His mind wasn't on the legal technicalities anymore. It was on a sun-blasted road, halfway across the world, on a man who had once shouted orders over the roar of enemy fire, who had yanked wounded Marines into cover with bloodied hands, who had, in a moment Daniel would never forget, hurled himself into the open to shield Daniel's own battered Humvee from a rocket. A bullet had struck Carter squarely in the chest. Daniel had been sure he was dead, but Carter had lived. And now here he was brought low, not by bullets or bombs, but by paperwork debt in a world that forgot too easily. Daniel leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Colonel Carter," he said, his voice steady now, "would you mind telling the court in your own words how you came to be in this situation?" The courtroom grew very still. The old man shifted slightly, cleared his throat. "After the Corps, I ran the family farm," he said simply. "Been in my family 3 generations." His voice was gravelly, slow, like someone unused to speaking. "Got hurt? Pretty bad a few years back. Back injuries. Can't work the land like I used to. Crop yields dropped, costs didn't. Bank offered a loan. I took it, thought I'd catch up the next season." He shrugged a small, defeated gesture. "Next season never got better." The bank's lawyer opened her mouth, but Daniel shot her a look that froze her words. "No family to help you?" Daniel asked gently. Carter shook his head. "Son died overseas, Afghanistan." The words hit like a hammer. Daniel felt his jaw clench. His mind screamed for action, for some loophole, some miracle. But here in the courtroom, miracles weren't easy to come by. "Your Honor, the bank's lawyer said again, more cautiously this time, "while we respect Mr. Carter's service, it does not negate his legal obligations." Daniel exhaled slowly. She was right by the letter of the law, but some debts ran deeper than banknotes. He glanced at Carter again. The old Marine stood proud, not begging, not pleading, just standing there ready to face whatever came next. Same as he had in the sands of Fallujah, Daniel felt something in his chest tighten. This wasn't just another foreclosure. This was unfinished business from a battlefield far from here. This was loyalty duty, a debt unpaid. And Daniel Brooks was not a man who left debts unpaid. He tapped his gavel lightly. "This court will recess for 15 minutes. He rose swiftly and disappeared into his chambers, heart pounding. Behind the closed door, he pulled out his phone with trembling fingers and scrolled to a number he hadn't called in years. General Patrick Langston. If anyone could help him find a way, an honorable way, to make this right, it was his old commanding officer, Daniel hit call, his mind racing. Outside in the courtroom, William Carter waited, standing alone against a world that had all but forgotten him. But not for much longer. Not if Daniel Brooks had anything to say about it. Daniel Brooks sat alone in his chambers, the faint buzz of the courthouse filling the space like static. His phone trembled slightly in his hand as it rang once, twice, before a gruff voice answered on the other end. "Brooks," the voice barked. "You still breathing, old man?" Daniel couldn't help a thin smile. "General Langston, I need a favor. And it's urgent?" There was a pause. Then the voice softened, sensing something beneath the judge's usual calm. "What's going on?" Daniel swallowed, glancing at the closed file still sitting on his desk, marked in thick black letters. "William Carter, Colonel Carter," Daniel said. "He's here in my courtroom, about to lose his family farm." The line went dead silent for a long second. Then Langston cursed under his breath, a rare crack in his gruff demeanor. "You're sure it's him? I'd stake my life on it," Daniel said, voice rough. "I already have once," Langston breathed out sharply. "Tell me what you need." Daniel's mind raced. They couldn't stop the court proceedings outright. It would raise too many questions, maybe even cause Carter to feel humiliated. No, this had to be done right, with dignity, quiet but powerful. "I need you to reach out to the Veterans Emergency Legal Fund," Daniel said, "and the Valor Foundation. Pull every string you can. We need something ready by this afternoon." "You got it," Langston said without hesitation. And Daniel, "Yeah, thank you for not letting him go through this alone." The call ended, leaving Daniel staring at the old photo on the far wall, a younger him grinning awkwardly next to a group of Marines in the sands of Iraq. At the center of the group, bigger than life, was Colonel Carter, arm thrown over Daniel's shoulders like they were brothers. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the memories wash over him. The courage, the sacrifice, the debt. He squared his shoulders and returned to the courtroom. When Daniel re-entered, the courtroom stirred slightly. William Carter hadn't moved from his spot, still standing straight, despite the years weighing on him. The bailiff watched curiously, sensing the tension humming beneath the polished surface. Daniel took his seat and tapped his gavel lightly. "Proceed," he said, voice controlled. The bank's attorney stood again, pushing forward with rehearsed efficiency. "Your Honor, while we acknowledge Mr. Carter's past service, the fact remains debts are due. Sentiment, while admirable, cannot substitute for payment." Daniel kept his face neutral. Inside, he seethed at the coldness of it all. The public defender, young Dugan, shifted uncomfortably beside Carter. He fumbled with his notes, clearly out of his depth. Your Honor, if I may, Dugan began but was quickly cut off as the bank's attorney pressed forward. Our client is prepared to proceed with immediate foreclosure followed by eviction proceedings within the next 30 days. 30 days in the dead of winter for a man who once stood between death and the men under his command. Without a second thought, Daniel set down his pen carefully, a deliberate move. Before we proceed further, he said, eyes steady on the attorney. This court would like to hear from Mr. Carter directly. There was a murmur in the gallery. William Carter blinked, surprised, but stepped forward with the same measured dignity he had shown since entering the room. Colonel Carter, Daniel said, using the title intentionally reverently, please tell this court about Hollow Creek Farm. The old man cleared his throat, voice low but clear. My grandfather built that farm after he came back from World War I. Carter began. Said he wanted a piece of land to call his own. He raised my father there. Then I grew up there running through the fields, helping with the cattle, mending fences after storms. His hands trembled slightly at his sides, but his voice didn't falter. After my service, I went home, took over the farm when Dad passed, tried to keep it running. It ain't fancy, it ain't big, but it's home. He paused, emotion flickering across his face. It's all I've got left. Daniel felt the weight of every word settle in the room. The bank's lawyer shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Daniel leaned forward slightly. And the loan needed new equipment. Carter said simply, tractors don't last forever. Neither do knees and backs. Thought I could work it off. Thought I could handle it. He gave a small, self-deprecating chuckle. Turns out pride don't fix a broken harvest. A few soft coughs echoed in the courtroom. Someone in the gallery dabbed at their eyes. Daniel sat back, letting the silence stretch, letting everyone feel the full gravity of what they were about to take from this man. And then, just as he was about to speak, the courtroom doors opened. Everyone turned. Three figures entered, two men in sharp suits and a woman with a determined stride, and all carrying thick folders. They approached the defense table swiftly. One handed Dugan a folded sheet of paper, another gave a nod to Daniel. Dugan, bewildered, opened the sheet. His eyes widened. He looked up, stammering, Your Honor, new evidence has just been presented on behalf of Mr. Carter. Daniel arched an eyebrow. Proceed. Dugan, regaining composure, cleared his throat and read aloud. Due to newly surfaced documentation and testimonies concerning Mr. Carter's distinguished military service, combined with financial mismanagement on the part of First National Bank, including inappropriate loan structuring and predatory terms not fully disclosed to the borrower, we respectfully petition this court to halt foreclosure proceedings pending a full investigation. The bank's attorney spluttered. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. Daniel leveled her with a look that could have cracked stone. So was Colonel Carter taking a bullet for this country when he didn't have to? A stunned silence fell. Daniel turned to Carter. Colonel, are you willing to allow this investigation to proceed on your behalf? The old Marine straightened, even more eyes sharp now. Yes, sir, Daniel nodded firmly. This court hereby grants a stay of foreclosure. All proceedings are paused pending a full inquiry. He struck the gavel down once the sound sharp and decisive. The courtroom erupted, murmurs, cheers, muffled behind hands, and a few quiet sobs. William Carter blinked in stunned disbelief. He wasn't losing his farm. Not today, and not without a fight. Daniel rose, gathering his papers. But before he left the bench, he paused. Looking directly at Carter, he said quietly but clearly enough for the entire courtroom to hear. Some debts can never be measured in dollars. Then he turned and walked out, leaving the words hanging in the air like a solemn vow. Outside, the rain had stopped. The first weak rays of sunlight broke through the clouds, casting a pale gold light over the steps of the courthouse. And inside, a battle that had once seemed lost had just begun to turn. Not through weapons, not through money, but through memory, loyalty, and honor that refused to die. The courthouse emptied slowly after the hearing, but Daniel Brooks remained seated behind the bench, watching as William Carter gathered his few belongings into a battered canvas bag. There was no triumph in the old Marine's posture, only quiet endurance, the same stoic dignity he had worn through battles far harsher than legal ones. Daniel tapped his gavel once more, though softly this time, just enough to catch Carter's attention. Colonel Carter, he said, his voice low but firm. Would you stay for a moment, please? William paused, straightened, and gave a small nod. His hand instinctively touched the brim of his worn cap, an old reflex from years of saluting. The young public defender, sensing the private nature of what was to come, mumbled something about filing paperwork and quickly excused himself. The bank's lawyer had already disappeared, heels clicking down the marble hallway like a retreating drumbeat. Soon it was just the two of them, a judge and a soldier surrounded by the heavy silence of a courtroom where something far more important than law had just played out. Daniel descended from the bench slowly, each step measured. When he stood at ground level, he saw how much time had truly worn Carter down. His skin was paper-thin over hard bones. His eyes were still sharp but rimmed with exhaustion, so deep it looked permanent. Yet even now he stood at parade rest out of habit or pride. Daniel couldn't tell which. "You don't recognize me, do you?" Daniel asked softly, stopping a few feet away. William squinted slightly, studying him. A shadow of confusion crossed his face. He rasped, not with disrespect, but genuine uncertainty. Daniel offered a faint smile. "Fallujah. November 2004, you pulled me out of a burning Humvee. I was a lieutenant then, barely more than a kid." A flicker of light sparked in William's tired eyes. "I remember a lot of fire," he murmured. "A lot of kids who should have never had to see what they saw." Daniel swallowed the lump forming in his throat. "You carried me 40 yards under heavy fire, took a bullet that should have been mine." William shrugged almost apologetically. "Was my job?" "No," Daniel said, voice tightening. "That was above and beyond anyone's job. You saved my life, Colonel." He let the words hang between them. Raw and real, William shifted uncomfortably, as if unsure how to bear the weight of gratitude after all these years. "You'd have done the same," he muttered. Daniel nodded slowly. "Maybe." "But you actually did." They stood there for a moment, two men with decades of silence and sacrifice stretched between them. Finally, Daniel cleared his throat. "I want you to know today wasn't about pity, it was about respect. About settling a debt that never should have gone unpaid this long." William blinked his throat, bobbing once in a hard swallow. "I don't want charity," he said gruffly, the Marine in him. Still fighting, Daniel smiled wider. Now warmer. "It's not charity," he said. "It's brotherhood." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "And you're not alone, Colonel." "Not anymore." William's jaw clenched, his gaze dropping to the scuffed floor. It took him a long moment to find his voice again. "Feels like I've been alone a long time," he whispered so quietly Daniel almost missed it. Daniel laid a steady hand on the older man's shoulder. "Not anymore," he repeated firmly. Outside the courthouse, the clouds had broken fully now, painting the marble steps in soft afternoon light. The storm had passed. That afternoon, the courthouse buzzed in quiet, excited confusion. A small fleet of black SUVs rolled up in front of the steps, drawing the attention of passers-by and courthouse staff alike. Out stepped uniformed Marines, older men, some walking with canes, some with chests still broad and proud beneath their civilian suits. Others were younger, fresh from active service, but all bore the unmistakable stamp of service in their bearing. At their head walked General Patrick Langston, his presence commanding even in plain clothes. They filed into the courthouse with silent purpose. Daniel met them at the door. "Hard-hammering but posture-controlled, General," he said, offering a crisp handshake. Judge Langston replied, "Where's Colonel Carter?" Daniel gestured toward a side hallway. William Carter sat alone on a bench, hat in his lap, shoulders stooped, but still fighting the invisible battles that had never really ended. When he looked up and saw them coming, a dozen Marines, old and young alike, something in his face cracked. Recognition, disbelief, and something deeper, a long dormant pride stirring back to life. General Langston stopped before him stiffly, straightened his back, and gave a slow, deliberate salute. "Colonel Carter," he said, voice thick with emotion, "we found you." William stared up at him, blinking hard. Langston's voice lowered. "And we're not letting you go through this alone." The other Marines saluted too, one by one, a line of respect and brotherhood spanning generations. William struggled to his feet, returning the salute with trembling fingers. Tears pricked at Daniel's eyes, unbidden. He wasn't the only one. Even courthouse clerks stood frozen in silent awe, the moment too pure, too heavy to interrupt. Langston smiled slightly and produced a thick folder. "And here are enough affidavits, letters of support, and financial pledges to pay off your loan," he said. "And to restore Hollow Creek Farm." William's mouth opened, but no words came. "Your farm's gonna stay yours," Langston said gently. "And we'll help fix it up too. You won't be fighting this battle alone anymore." William finally managed a hoarse, broken whisper. "Why? Why would you all do this?" Langston's smile widened, a fierce pride burning in his eyes. "Because you led us when it mattered most. Now it's our turn." The old Marine sagged against the wall, overwhelmed, but for the first time in a long time, It wasn't the weight of defeat he was carrying. It was the weight of being remembered. As the courthouse cleared for the day, Daniel Brooks stepped out onto the marble steps and looked up at the sky. The sun was setting behind the courthouse, casting a golden light over everything. A rare, perfect moment of peace, he smiled quietly to himself. Some debts. Some debts were never truly repaid. But sometimes if you were lucky, you got the chance to try. And Daniel intended to make the most of it. The story of Colonel William Carter wasn't over. No, it was just beginning. 2 days later, a battered pickup truck rolled slowly up the winding dirt road toward Hollow Creek Farm. William Carter sat stiffly in the passenger seat, his old cap clutched between his hands while Daniel Brooks carefully navigated the potholes. The land stretched out before them, brown and tired under the weight of too many hard seasons. The farmhouse, once proud with its whitewashed siding and blue shutters, sagged now under years of neglect. The barn leaned precariously to one side, its roof half collapsed. Fences had fallen. Fields lay choked with weeds. William's chest tightened painfully at the sight. This wasn't the home he remembered. It was a battlefield left abandoned, and he wasn't sure he had the strength to reclaim it. Daniel pulled to a stop near the front porch and killed the engine. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Finally, William rasped, "You didn't have to drive me." Daniel smiled slightly. "I wasn't going to let you walk back onto this place alone." William's hand hovered near the door handle but hesitated. "It's worse than I remembered," he muttered. Daniel followed his gaze, feeling the weight in the old Marine's voice. "It's just a starting point," Daniel said softly, "not the end." He pushed open his door and climbed out. After a moment, William did too, moving stiffly, favoring his right knee. They stood side by side, surveying the ruins of the past. And then, faint at first, but growing louder, came the rumble of engines. William turned, frowning. Down the road, a line of vehicles appeared, pickups, flatbeds, even a battered school bus. Flags fluttered from the mirrors, Marine Corps flags, American flags battered. Unit banners from wars past, and spilling from them, a small army of volunteers, men and women, young and old, wearing work boots and baseball caps and service jackets. Some walked with limps, others carried hammers, saws, tool belts slung over their shoulders. At their head marched General Langston, sleeves rolled up, grinning broadly. William stared, unable to speak. Langston stopped in front of him, planting his boots firmly in the dust. "You didn't think we were going to let you rebuild this place by yourself, did you?" A ripple of laughter and cheers rose from the volunteers. William swallowed hard, his throat burning. I don't know what to say," he managed. Langston clapped him on the shoulder. "Then don't say anything, Colonel. Just get ready to work." The next hours unfolded in a kind of dream. The barn doors were pulled open, airing out years of musty disuse. Piles of rotting wood were hauled away. New lumber arrived by the truckload, donated from local businesses, once they heard whose farm this was. One crew started replacing the farmhouse roof, another set to mending fences, pounding posts into the stubborn earth. Kids scrambled around with paintbrushes covering the weathered siding in fresh bright white. Daniel found himself hauling broken beams alongside an old Marine named Torres who had lost a leg in Fallujah but still outworked half the men there. "You know," Torres said, wiping sweat from his brow, "Colonel Carter used to have this saying, if your arms ain't trembling and your back ain't screaming, you ain't earned your dinner yet." Daniel laughed breathlessly. "Sounds about right." Across the yard, William moved among them, slowly giving quiet instructions, checking every nail, every beam. His back was bowed, his steps uncertain, but there was a light in his eyes that hadn't been there in years. It was hope raw, new fragile, but it was there. Not everyone was pleased, though. Parked at the far end of the dirt road sat a sleek black sedan. Inside, Councilman Richard Hanlon watched the scene through narrowed eyes, his fingers drumming impatiently on the steering wheel. Hanlon had long coveted Hollow Creek Farm. He had plans, a corporate development project that would bring in big investors and even bigger kickbacks. Carter's foreclosure was supposed to have been the final domino. Now it was slipping away. Hanlon cursed under his breath. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. He pulled out his phone and made a call. "I don't care what you have to do," he snapped. "Find a way to stop that reconstruction. Building code violations, zoning issues. Whatever it takes." He ended the call, his jaw tight with anger. If William Carter thought he could waltz back from oblivion, he was in for a rude awakening. At dusk, work slowed. Volunteers gathered around a makeshift table, an old door set across two sawhorses sharing chili and cornbread, swapping stories beneath strings of hastily hung lights. William sat at the head of the table, protesting weakly at first, but quickly overwhelmed by the sheer stubbornness of his comrades. Someone handed him a chipped mug of coffee. Another pressed a plate of food into his hands. "You earned it, Colonel," a voice said warmly. William blinked at the crowd around him. Faces from old wars and new ones. Strangers bound not by blood, but by brotherhood. He set the mug down carefully, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, William Carter laughed. It was a low, rusty sound at first, but it grew rich, full alive. The laughter spread, carrying across the farmyard like a banner in the wind. Above them, the stars blinked into life, scattered across the velvet sky. And beneath them, Hollow Creek Farm began to breathe again, piece by piece, nail by nail, memory by memory. It wasn't just a farm they were rebuilding. It was a life. The morning after the great gathering, the sun rose sharp and golden over Hollow Creek Farm. Birdsong threaded through the crisp air, and the scent of fresh-cut lumber and turned earth lingered like a promise in the field. The farm, though far from fully restored, already looked different, like a man slowly straightening after being hunched for too long. William Carter stood at the edge of his porch, coffee steaming in his mug, watching as a new crew of volunteers pulled up, some from nearby towns, others from states away. Word had spread. The farm had become more than a local project. It had become a symbol. Hope, loyalty, quiet, defiance against forgetting. William's fingers tightened around his mug. He wasn't used to being anyone's symbol. He just wanted his home back. And yet some part of him swelled with the knowledge that maybe, just maybe, he was fighting a new kind of battle now. One worth every scar. The first sign of trouble came before noon. A white county truck barreled up the driveway, kicking dust in great angry clouds. Out jumped two city officials, clipboards in hand, hard faces drawn tight with bureaucratic authority. General Langston, Daniel Brooks, and a few others gathered near the porch steps as the men approached. The taller of the two officials flipped open his clipboard with theatrical importance. "We've received a complaint regarding unauthorized construction," he announced loudly enough for half the farm to hear. "No permits have been filed. No inspections approved." Langston crossed his arms slowly. "And who exactly filed that complaint?" The official gave a tight smile, anonymous tip. "But it doesn't change the facts. This property is under a stop work order until further notice." Gasps rippled through the volunteers. William stepped forward, jaw set. "This is my land," he said, voice low but carrying. "These people are helping me fix what's mine." The official shrugged. "Doesn't matter. No work without permits. Violations could lead to fines or even seizure." A muscle ticked in Daniel's jaw. He knew exactly who was behind this. Hanlon. Of course the snake would strike now, when Carter was just beginning to stand again. Langston leaned in slightly, his tone cold steel. "You're telling a decorated Marine he can't fix his own house?" The official, perhaps sensing the simmering anger gathering around him, faltered. "Oh, for a moment. Look, we're just enforcing the regulations." Daniel stepped forward, formal and deliberate, black robes trailing like a judge on the warpath. "I'd suggest you double-check the regulations before making any threats," he said smoothly. "Because as of this morning, personally, I filed an emergency petition with the county court requesting veteran status exemption under the Historical Property Preservation Act." He handed over a thick folder, his smile razor sharp, and the judge who signed that order was me. The official flipped through the paperwork, his face draining of color. "The repairs are protected under emergency preservation." Daniel continued calmly. "No permits needed, no fines authorized. Any attempt to interfere will be seen as harassment of a federally recognized veteran heritage site." Langston chuckled under his breath. "Checkmate," the officials conferred quickly, voices low and panicked. Finally, they climbed back into their truck and roared off down the driveway, their departure less a retreat than a full rout. Cheers erupted from the crowd. William stood frozen, disbelief warring with something deeper. Gratitude too big to name. Daniel clapped him gently on the back. "You're not alone anymore, Colonel," he said quietly. "You never were," Langston added with a grin. "You just forgot for a little while. We're just here to remind you." That afternoon, the farmyard bustled with even greater energy. Hammers rang out. Shingles went up. Fences were repaired faster than William could walk the perimeter. And at the very center of it all, just beside the repaired barn, a group of volunteers erected something new, a tall flagpole shining under the sun. At its base, they installed a stone marker, hand-carved by one of the local masons. The inscription was simple, yet it carried the weight of everything they had fought for: Hollow Creek Farm, in honor of Colonel William Carter and all those who gave everything and asked nothing. When the pole was ready, two Marines unfolded a crisp American flag. They raised it slowly, the fabric snapping smartly in the wind. William stood at attention, shoulders squared, eyes bright with unshed tears. Around him, every head bowed, every hand over every heart. The flag climbed higher and higher until it reached the top where it caught the breeze and unfurled fully bright against the blue. The crowd held a solemn silence, only broken when Langston barked, "Attention!" Every veteran in the yard snapped to a salute. Daniel, too, placed his hand over his heart, standing proud and still. William's arm trembled slightly as he raised his own salute, not from weakness, but from the sheer overwhelming strength it took to hold back all the emotion crashing through him. When the salute broke, he turned slowly to face the crowd. He cleared his throat once, twice. Then he spoke, voice rough but strong. "I spent a long time thinking. Nobody remembered." He said simply, thinking maybe it didn't matter anymore. He looked around at the faces beaming at him, the hands calloused from hard work, done not for pay, but for loyalty. "I was wrong." He bowed his head for a long moment, gathering himself. "Thank you," he said finally, "for reminding me." A cheer broke out louder than any he'd ever heard, and in that moment, standing beneath the waving flag, William Carter knew. This farm wasn't just his anymore. It belonged to all of them. To everyone who believed that honor wasn't something you wore for a day, but something you carried quietly, stubbornly, even when the world forgot. As twilight settled over Hollow Creek, the farm glowed with life. Fresh paint, mended fences, laughter drifting through the fields. Children ran between the hay bales. Old veterans shared stories under the porch light. And William Carter, once forgotten, stood in the center of it all, a living monument to the idea that some things, no matter how battered by time, could still stand strong if given the chance. As the last rays of sun slipped behind the hills, William looked up at the flag one more time. The words of his old platoon motto echoed in his mind, steady and sure. No one left behind, and tonight, for the first time in many years, he truly believed it again. In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way, often in the quietest places. Not everyone who helps wants recognition. Some just need to know that today, someone isn't going hungry. And sometimes, that alone is enough to change a life. You may forget the story, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. Subscribe to Grateful Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.